something that I mean without reservation. I want to be very, very clear. Therapy works. Not every form of therapy and not every therapist and not for every person or every condition, but therapy, when it is done well by a skilled and genuinely caring practitioner with a client who is genuinely engaged, produces real and meaningful change in really real and meaningful ways. The reduction of symptoms that are genuinely debilitating, healing of wounds and trauma, the development of capacities for self-understanding and emotional regulation that were not present before. I mean, the processing of experiences that were carried alone for too long. I mean, these outcomes are real. And I have those same experiences with a very amazing therapist that I have now known for several years. And the people who have experienced these things have every reason to be grateful for the work and for the person who did it with them. Now, I say this on the onset because what follows is a description of the limits of therapy, okay? And this isn't a pejorative, it's just the conversation continues to come up, and I want to show these distinctions. And I want that description that I'm going to give to be received in its proper context. So the limits of therapy, then, what I'm trying to say is they're not criticisms whatsoever. Every tool has limits. Every hammer is extraordinary at what it does, and but it's not the right tool for every situation. Recognizing what a hammer can and cannot do does not diminish what it does. Okay? The same is true here. What I want to examine today is the specific gap between what therapy is designed to address and what the work of identity clarity requires, which is the work that I do, which is not therapy, because they're related and they overlap significantly and they walk hand in hand in some areas, and yet they're not the same thing. And understanding the difference is one of the most useful things that you can do when navigating the landscape of your own personal development in an honest way. So, what does therapy do? What therapy does in an honest sense. Therapy, in its most effective forms, addresses specific things. It can address symptoms of anxiety, depression, PTSD, phobias, relational patterns that produce consistent harm. It provides a relationship in which experiences that were overwhelming can be processed in the presence of a witness who is skilled at holding what emerges without being stabilized by it. It provides frameworks for understanding the origin and function of patterns that have become problematic. And it can also develop capacities like help develop capacities like emotional regulation, understanding how to recognize cognitive distortions, and the development of more secure attachment patterns, the reduction of reactivity in triggering situations, etc. So this is an important tool set, right? These are significant, very significant, and extremely valuable outcomes that most people need. And for many people, they are exactly what is needed at a specific point or any particular point in their development. The person who is in acute distress, who is genuinely symptomatic in ways that are preventing them from functioning, who is carrying some trauma that is unprocessed, or maybe in some relationships, and the patterns are so damaging that their basic well-being is being compromised. I mean, that person is a prime candidate for a good therapist. And then therapy in that sense is the right tool for what they're carrying. What therapy is not primarily designed to do, though, and what most therapeutic modalities do not address as their central concern, is the question of identity. Not identity in the clinical sense. Identity disorder is a clinical category, and therapy does address that specifically. But identity in the sense I have been using throughout this series, the question of whether the self a person is living from is genuine or performed, whether the patterns being addressed in therapy are symptoms of a specific clinical condition or expressions of a mask identity that has never been examined at the level of identity. Whether healing specific wounds, important as that is, addresses the underlying structure from which the wounds emerged or only the wounds themselves. So that's rambling in a sense, but this distinction matters. And it matters because a person can do significant, genuine therapeutic work and can heal real wounds and develop real capacities and still be at the structural level of their identity, organized around a performance rather than a genuine self. And so the therapy addresses what it was designed to address. The identity question was not in the therapeutic scope. And so the person then is genuinely improved in extremely meaningful ways, and then underneath the improvement, sometimes wearing the same mask they came in with. Better resourced, more self-aware, more healed, and still not free in the specific sense I'm describing. And that, again, is not a failure on the therapeutic model. It is just not what the therapeutic model addresses. So let's talk about that gap. The gap between therapy and identity work is not a criticism. Again, I say that over and over again. It is a description of territory that therapy is not primarily chartered to cover. And that is real territory. And the people who are in it, who have done significant therapeutic work and are really better because of it, still feel that specific gap between who they are performing and who they actually are. They need to know that that gap is not evidence of insufficient therapy. It's the evidence of a different question that's not yet been fully engaged. And the question is identity, and identity work in the sense I'm describing requires a completely different orientation than therapeutic work. Therapy orients toward the reduction of what is causing the harm. Identity work orients toward the recognition of what is actually true. Now, this is my theory of this. Most identity work is not like this. Therapy works in the context of experience, the wounds, the patterns, symptoms. The identity work that we're talking about here works with the structure of experience, the self from which the content is arising. So therapy would ask the question, what's happened? And what is it still doing to me? And how do I want to address that? Identity work asks, who is this person that all of this has happened to? And is that person being lived from, or is a managed version of that person being lived from instead? So these questions are not in competition. They are really complementary. And for many people, the most effective path, like myself, involves both. The therapeutic work addresses what needs healing. The identity work addresses the question of who is doing the healing and from what ground the healed person will be living. One without the other is incomplete, but the two are different enough in their orientation that they cannot be assumed to be addressing the same thing. The person who's done significant therapy and still fills the gap, and who is told by the therapeutic framework that they simply need more of the same work, is in a situation that is just worth examining honestly. Not because more therapeutic work is the wrong answer. Sometimes it is exactly what is needed, and most of the times it is exactly what's needed when the therapist suggests it. But because the persistence of the gap, despite sustained effort, is sometimes the signal that the question being addressed is not the one that most needs addressing. And so no amount of excellent work on the question that is not the primary question will close the gap that the primary question is creating. So this is going to be short, and I've got just a few more minutes here. So what I'm describing is not a replacement for therapy. It is a completion of it. And is it a completion of it as a complement and a companion? The person who has done genuine healing work and is ready to engage the identity question at the structural level is in an excellent position to do so. The healing has cleared enough of the acute distress that the stillness required for genuine identity encounter is available. That's why a lot of the people that I work with, when they come to me, they're so just dysregulated in their body, and they're so their emotion is so on edge that while I can give them things to assist them in that, I always refer and recommend them see a professional therapist in this space so that they can get the structural tools in an urgent sense sometimes to become a whole person. Then they can do this. And then the self-awareness that therapy develops is a real asset when they come to someone like me. The relational trust that good therapeutic experiences has built is the foundation from which the more vulnerable moments of identity work can be navigated, because the space of discovery is often a little bit unnerving. What adds to that foundation rather than substitutes for it, is the specific work of seeing the mask identity clearly enough that the person underneath it becomes recognizable. Not by adding more to the existing structure, but by developing enough clarity about the structure itself that the foundation is built on, whether genuine identity performed or performed identity becomes visible. And that clarity, it's a big word, that clarity, once it arrives, is what produces the specific quality of freedom that both the additive model and the therapeutic model in isolation cannot fully deliver. Now, if you're thinking, what are you talking about? This is an addendum to a lecture I did a week or two ago on the addition model of personal growth and development. So the question that this lecture wants to leave you with is a simple one. In the work you have done, in whatever form it has taken, what has been addressed? What has genuinely changed? And what remains? Not as a measure of failure or missed. The things that remain unchanged are not failures of the work. They may simply be territory that the work was not designed to cover. And knowing which is one of the most useful things you can know about where you are and what the next genuine movement requires. So if you're working with a therapist and you're wondering if the work that I do is something that you should add to your plate, talk to me. I'll show you an assessment. You can take that assessment to your therapist and you can decide together. This is James Tippins. This is Unbound, Freedom for Life. Join me tomorrow and we're going to start getting very interesting